chasing every beam of sunlight. We're running after all the color galaxies we will discover. Up above the ground, reaching for starlight. We're defying gravity. There is nothing else we need. 30,000 feet, the clouds go by. We're going faster. It's just you and I. Our dreams inside, our dreams inside. We don't need the world below. We'll fly.
So today we are going to go IFR over to Watsonville. It's kind of rare that we have clouds in Northern California recently. Haven't had a whole lot of rain. So first opportunity here that I've had with a little bit of time. We're going to go get in some real IFR over to Watsonville, maybe have lunch at the restaurant if it's open, and get this thing going. iPad is firing up. 084 radio. All right, we are good to go. Clear. Well, it's one of those things that, wouldn't you know it, you plan for a trip, hoping that all of your audio and everything is on and everything is recording. I've got my audio plugged into the headset jacks for the rear passengers, and dingling me didn't engage that on the audio panel. And so I can barely hear audio come through as I'm listening to the video. But unfortunately, this whole flight ended up being no audio whatsoever, which is disappointing. I'm going to narrate a little bit of it and keep it just short about this IFR flight. And ended up not going just because it was bouncy and there was significant rain out towards Salinas and Watsonville, that if we're only going to lunch, why bother going through? So anyway, hope you enjoy the video. Going to keep it short, going to keep the narration down to a minimum, and if you have any questions or comments, let me know. Thanks. On departure, did our normal run-up and then got a hold of the NorCal Tracon and received our clearance, and ended up calling them back after we were ready to go, and departed on runway 30 with our standard departure procedure, which is runway heading up to 700 feet, right-hand turn to a 150 heading, and then fly to or onto the Modesto VOR 84 radial and direct to the Modesto VOR. Most of the time when we do an IFR departure out of Tracy on 30, we don't have to go all the way to the Modesto VOR, and they will end up vectoring us onto Victor 111. But anyway, uneventful departure. The ceilings were not too bad as it was straight in front of us. There was a bit of rain coming into the area, but as we did our right-hand turn heading towards our 150 heading, and then onto the Modesto VOR, it wasn't as intense and as bad as what it looks out of the front of the plane. Got a few drops on us, but ended up turning out and climbing. They gave us an initial 4,000 foot level, but as you can see, they typically will vector us out. And this is about where we ended up getting a direct to windy intersection and climb and maintain 6,000. But this is not, the weather of the day, but it ends up putting us over to the Salinas VOR, and then Salinas VOR into Watsonville. They usually will give us a direct to heading to one of the initial approach fixes once we get somewhere around the Jejma intersection that it showed there on the chart. So anyway, we are in a climb heading out towards the clouds, talking to ATC, and ended up once we got up above probably 1,500, 2,000 feet, and heading towards Modesto VOR in this turn is when we started getting into some of the convective turbulence, as you'll see here, and had some interesting things happen on the climb out. And so the video of that is coming up here. But as you can see, the clouds are not, too bad. There's not a whole lot of rain activity in the direction that we are heading at this moment. And then once we ended up heading towards the Modesto VOR is when we got into the soup and started seeing, a little bit of ups and downdrafts. As you can see from the iPad, you can see some of the significant weather that was going on the iPad. I don't have the weather tied in on the Avidynes at this point. There is a lead that needs to come off of the ADSB weather into from the transponder into the Avidynes, and I just have not had a chance for someone in an avionics shop to go in and pin that yet to be able to get that weather over. But after yesterday's flight, that's going to be one of my important things to do. But as you can see, we got into the soup and weren't initially getting knocked around too bad, and climbing through, a couple thousand feet. At this point, we're up, approaching 5,000 feet. We ended up, as you can, kind of see with the ups and downs here, we ended up getting into what I believe was some wind shear, because we ended up getting a ARL airspeed warning and got down to 65 knots. But the VSI during that climb out and going through the clouds was indicating, you know, a couple 100 feet, 500 feet. It wasn't anything that was drastic, where we had the, you know, the nose of the plane pointed up, you know, higher than a, you know, a typical, you know, 10, maybe a 15 degree climb angle. And so it was really quite surprising to me that I was getting, and then looking down and seeing that our airspeed had dropped off to 65 knots. And then all of a sudden, boom, recovered, and we were, you know, back into it again. But ended up doing a climb up to 6,000 feet, and you know, some of it got, you know, pretty bumpy. I wasn't super concerned, but you know, being that we still had some ground contact and, you know, in the soup, wasn't too bad. But as you know, I've done in some of my other videos and stated, I really, you know, if you don't have to fly in the bumps, it's just a lot more enjoyable. I have had many IFR flights where there's just not been any bumps or anything, and just in the soup. But this flight ended up not being that way. So right now we're in a turn heading direct to the windy intersection, and we've still got ground contact, but forward visibility, we're kind of in the soup on this particular flight. And this is about the point where, looking out in front of me and looking at the iPad of what the weather was over in the Salinas area and Watsonville, and seeing some yellow and some red as far as precip was concerned. I was in the clear at this point and just made the executive decision that it's like, I'm only going to lunch. I don't have to get there, don't have to go do this flight and get my butt bounced around the sky and get into something that could end up being, you know, a problem. So I ended up calling ATC, just disconnected the autopilot and told them that I was canceling IFR. They just asked why, was wondering if I was in the clear. I said, yes, I've got ground contact, and I'll head back to, you know, the Tracy Airport. So we ended up descending out of the 6,000 feet and heading back to the airport. And after talking with some other pilots and some things that had happened with the weather, it was a good decision to terminate and not go. There was just, as you can see in little glimpses of the iPad here as I move my head, it ended up being one of those days that, with the convective activity and everything going on, if you didn't have to be in it, it was probably a good idea not to be in it. So, as you can see with aviation, sometimes things work out like you want in a flight, and sometimes they don't. We headed back uneventfully to the Tracy Airport and landed and put the plane back. And like I said earlier, in talking to some of the other pilots, it was a good decision just not to go that day and stay the heck out of the sky in a small 172. So anyway, thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next one. And that's a wrap.
Come back See us again. Shall do. Center 1 Mike.